I am thrilled to introduce our first speaker, who is coming up. Dr. Anne Haddix comes to us from Atlanta, but before that, she was local. We really mean it when we say buy local. She grew up in Fresno, and when Kathleen Carley called her on a lark to see if we could get this wonderful lady to come and to our little sweet town on the central coast of California, thought, oh, she's busy doing big CDC stuff and all over the country. And she said, oh, I would love to come visit my homegrown area. So we're very lucky to have that opportunity. Dr. Haddix is the Senior Policy Advisor to the Director of the CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. She advises that whole unit of CDC on food and nutrition policy. She did spend a period of time in academia, and she found that she wanted to come back to where the action was at CDC, and did so after spending some time on faculty at the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University. She's been with CDC since 2004, and what's really important in her background is that she got her early roots, pardon the pun, in agricultural economics, and has spent a lot of time looking at the economic evaluation of our food policies and such. So those who can't be convinced through the moral objectives of bringing us all forward for healthier living, there is also a lot of economic issues involved with us remaining unhealthy. So we have that type of appeal as well. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Haddix.
Okay, first, right off, this is not an econ lecture. You do not have to leave the room. I usually have to give that disclaimer at CDC too, because, you know, I'm an economist in this sea of public health practitioners and epidemiologists, and you just put up $1 sign and they're out the door. How many people here have econ phobia? Oh, come on, admit it, admit it. Yeah, I know you're out there. Yeah. So I, first of all, really want to thank the organizers and Kathleen Carley in particular for reaching out to me to come out here, because this is home. I've been gone for 30 years. It is home. It always will be home. Once you're a Californian, you can't get it out of your blood. So, but I came out for another reason too. And I didn't come out to tell you what CDC says that you all should do, because one of the challenges in that is that you all in this room are already telling CDC what should be done. So SLO as a county and as a city is really on the cutting edge of trying to mush health with planning, with the built environment, with transportation, with all the other aspects that go into making up a community. And it's communities like this that we need to look at. What are you doing? How are you doing it? How did you figure out how to do that? What were the mistakes you made, so we can tell other communities not to repeat them? And I'm sure everybody in this room has one or two. And figure out how, from CDC's perspective, part of my job is to hold you up as leaders and help other communities come on where the distance that you've already made. Now, one of the challenges, if you're sort of on that cutting edge, is that you can't look at communities that are perhaps ahead of you and chart out a path to go. You just kind of got to blaze on into the wilderness and try out things that maybe have not been tried before. I mean, sometimes you have to look and say, well, you know, what's happening? What are some of the European communities doing? And believe me, have you all heard the term that's becoming fairly widely used now, health in all policies? I mean, that was a European concept. That was a concept that we started looking at what was going on there and trying to figure out how we could bring it here and institute it within our form of government and within our form of society. So we're going to be continuing to watch what you all are doing and watch as you move out there and make some mistakes. But I'm from CDC, so I got to show at least a few numbers or I'll be shot. I mean, well, no, we're against gun control. We don't say that out loud, though, because we have some Congress issues, but anyway. And I'm going to go through my slides and show you what we're talking to all communities about, so you'll get a better sense of that. But then, and these are my pre-approved slides. When you're working in the federal government these days, it's particularly at CDC, it can be a little bit of a challenging environment, particularly when in a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks, I don't know how many days, things are going to happen, whatever they will be, which I'm not going to comment on. But what I'd like to do, so I'm going to go through my slides, but then I'm going to also, what I'd also like to do is that I've been working in this field now for a number of years, and CDC's been implementing through the stimulus program and our community transformation grant program a whole number of projects around the country, as well as so have a wide range of other funders. And I just want to share with you some of the trends that I see emerging out of that and some thoughts about where we're going in the future. So with that, I'm actually going to start my presentation. And hopefully it'll all show up here. This is a really interesting slide because not only do they tell you what slide you currently have on the screen, but they show you the slide that's going to be next, which is really good for people like me who totally diverge off of their talks. It helps me keep focused, so hopefully this will be a more organized talk than usual. I was waiting for the people to come up with the drums so that when I told jokes, they could do a drum roll, since nobody usually gets my jokes, and then at least you know it was a joke. But we couldn't quite coordinate that. So anyway, we'll get moving on so I don't waste all of our time here. So first of all, this year, and one of the reasons that I wanted to put up some numbers about self-reported obesity among U.S. adults for 2011 is our new obesity maps, which I'm sure you all use. I mean, have you all seen our obesity maps before? I mean, everybody uses them. They make really pretty things you can put in your slideshows. But we changed our methodology this year. We changed our how we collected our data. And so it's useful for me just to talk about a couple of things. And what we did this so that now our maps are not comparable with the previous year so that everybody's totally confused. But hey, we're the government. That's what we do. So, I mean, not really. I mean, we're really trying to get more and more precise estimates of what's going on. But anyway, as you all know, obesity, body mass index of 30 or higher, and I've put up a definition of body mass index for those of you who need a little bit of a refresher course. And the data that we use from this is our BRFS data system. I'm sure that those folks in the health department here at SLO know this very well. We collect data that's specific. I mean, I'm sure we collect data specific to this county in this, as well as other counties across the country. It's state-based. And we use this information from the states to generate our obesity maps that we put out each year. So the bad news, which was unfortunately not surprising news, is that this year for adult obesity, no state has a prevalence of obesity less than 20%. And 11 states and the District of Columbia had prevalences between 20 and 25%. This is obesity. This does not include overweight, okay? So this is obesity. When you add overweight in, the numbers are much larger. There are 12 states that, including the southern region in which I now live, where the obesity prevalence is equal to or greater than 30%. And I think as you saw from the previous speaker, I think, Jennifer, you put up that it's, 19% here? And I think the most recent numbers I saw showed that it was 20 or 21% for the county. So, I mean, unfortunately, it is going up in adults. Still, it's not going up quite as fast as it was, but it is still going up. And I'm going to talk a lot about preventing obesity in the beginning part of this talk, but I do want to conclude with some conversations on, okay, we have a population that has 20% or higher obesity in our adult population, and we have a significant other part of this population who is overweight and may be headed to obesity. And now we have a whole issue of how are we going to manage the health concerns in these folks. So we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the talk. So here's the map. The that we have. So you can see the prevalence. This is the one that everybody likes to put in. You can see California, always in California. You guys are at the low end. Anyway, so what did we find with this new study? Well, let's talk a little bit about kids, because, okay, so we have obesity in adults. We don't have the same map for kids, but we still know that between the latest NHANES findings are that there has been a twofold increase between the 70s and 2000. And between 2000 and 2010, this increase continues. Where we once thought this was a problem, the prevalences were higher in girls. We're now seeing boys catching up rapidly and even surpassing the girls' rates in many areas. And 1 in 6 U.S. children were obese. And if 1 in 6 are obese at this age, what is our adult population going to look like? So, I mean, these are very, very challenging issues, not only for the health of our population and their quality of life, but it's a very, very challenging issue in terms of our future productivity. I mean, when you have counties like yours that, I mean, your obesity rates are still low, but, you know, I mean, every person in here who is in a position where you're looking at your county plans and your county budgets, and you're looking at the premiums for your county employees, and they're going up every year, and part of the reason they're going up is because obesity rates and the associated health problems are increasing, so premiums are increasing. So your general revenues are going into paying premiums for employees and not building bike paths, not building other, adding other amenities, not taking care of other services that need to be taken care of. So you have problems in that regard, and now you also have a population that has more days off from work that are causing higher healthcare premiums for their employers, whose productivity in general, even when they're on the job, is lower. What does that do for your overall competitiveness? I mean, well, one of the things within the U.S., everybody's in the same boat, so at least you're not competing with each other, but what does it mean when, as the U.S. as a whole, in our competitiveness when competing with other countries? When we have a population where a good chunk is not as healthy and as productive as they could be. You know, obesity now is the #1 reason. See how I always diverge from everything? But obesity is the #1 reason why someone is rejected from the military now. I think having too many tattoos is another reason, but I don't know where on the list it goes. But obesity is a problem. I just learned that tattoo thing the other day, so it's like, oh, okay. Anyway, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what DOD's done and some of the influence the work at CDC has had on that. So the approach that CDC has taken, our general philosophy, is that one of the things that we have to do, and I can see it everywhere in this county, but believe me, the attitude that you have in this county, which make healthy choices easier, I mean, who even would question in this room that that's not something that you should do? So, but it's not that way everywhere when we're out talking about obesity. But this is our approach. We have to make healthy choices easier. We know that personal choice in what you eat and how much you exercise is very, very, very important. At the end of the day, it is that personal choice that is going to determine whether you will become obese or not. But choice indicates that you have something to choose from. And that's the part that we are trying to address, giving Americans choices and giving them information about those choices. I mean, if you go to the grocery store when you can get there, and there are no fresh fruits and vegetables there, how do you choose to eat more fresh fruits and vegetables? If you're inundated with information from a skewed set of information from producers of unhealthy products, and you're not receiving any information on the nutritional aspects of those products or the nutritional benefits of other products, such as fresh fruits and vegetables, how do you make an informed choice? So our strategy here is, yes, personal choice and personal responsibility are important, but people have to live in an environment where they have those choices to make and where they're encouraged to make healthy choices. Okay, so with that, what are the types of things that we are really targeting at CDC to improve childhood obesity rates? And with children, it's different, isn't it? I mean, personal choice that children make and personal choice that people make who are no longer able to make choices, there is some sort of societal responsibility. This is Anne speaking, this is not the agency, to help people have more options available to them. So I have to be really careful. I used to be able to say this kind of stuff all the time, but you can't believe what we have to do to... I mean, actually, just 2 weeks ago, they were saying, well, maybe you really shouldn't go out there and talk about this stuff. I was like, yeah. That would have sent, I think that it would have been a public health hazard if I hadn't come, because Kathleen would have gone into cardiac arrest. So, if one more of your speakers had to cancel down on you. So I convinced them that it was my public health responsibility to come out here and do this. So on the childhood front, the first and foremost is breastfeeding. Getting moms to breastfeed their children gets kids off on a healthier start. The evidence is all over the place on that one. Getting kids to eat more fruits and vegetables, beginning as young as possible. Convincing children that they should drink water, which if you start very young is really not so hard to convince. Getting your kids moving, daily physical activity, and surprisingly, well, not really surprisingly, but we don't do it enough, making sure kids sleep enough at night and that they eat breakfast before they go to school, or that our schools have breakfast available to kids before they start their school day. So we're trying to do everything that we can to discourage unhealthy choices, such as energy-dense foods, beverages with added sugars, and encourage kids to watch less television and passive screen time, i.e. playing video games. So that is our approach, and I think this slide, as complex as it appears to be, one of the things that it shows you, particularly that purple box on the upper right, is that, it's like we're fighting a war on obesity, and we have to fight it from all fronts. There is no magic bullet. There will be no magic drug. There is no one thing that we can do that if we do this, that will make the biggest difference. What's going to get us moving on reducing our obesity prevalence numbers is if we do everything. Everything. If we're doing something in everything, if we're giving people more personal choice, if kids are getting better foods to eat at schools and are encouraged to exercise there, if there is a farmer's market in the community, if the county planning is thinking about these things all the way, if there are incentives from the federal level that helps counties and cities put healthier choices into place, if there is a healthcare system that is reinforcing these messages, that being delivered every time a patient comes in and is working with the community to implement them. So complex as this looks, it's going to take this complexity to solve this problem. They have this really big clock down here. If I seem to be staring down, I'm looking down there going, am I on time? I could look at my watch, but I have glasses these days. So anyway, so these are, this is just really a rehash of what I just said. These are the different environments in which we can work, and all acting on our intervention population. And, in this case, our intervention population is basically all of us these days. But we target things to children, adults, seniors, etc. And these are the kinds of things that we are doing. These are our priority strategies by target area. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about each one of these things, because these are, I've been working on all of these projects over the last 3 years. Nutrition standards and food service guidelines in a variety of settings, menu labeling and point of purchase information. Just think if I'd been giving this talk 3 years ago and you'd be going, what is she doing? But now you're saying, we've done that. So fruits and vegetables increasing through retail stores, markets, farmers markets, and farm stands. I like this, farm to where you are. So farm to preschool, farm to schools, farm to hospitals, farms to institutions, food policy advisory councils, and then tackling probably the single most contributor to obesity. I mean, if you're going to find really the one that you want to go after first and that's likely to have the biggest impact, it's the sugar-sweetened beverage. And no, the S on the end of sugars is not a mistake. And if you want to know how that came about, you can catch me in the break time, and if you swear to secrecy, I'll tell you. And you can all imagine where that might have come from. So ensuring access to safe and good-tasting drinking water, and that's a big one for me. I have this really pet peeve when I'm traveling that you have to give up your water to go through the airport security, right? And so I started saying, okay, well, I'm going to carry an empty water bottle with me. Do you know how hard it is to find a place to fill up your water bottle once you get through security in an airport? Is that like ridiculous? I mean, shouldn't there be a place? I mean, because now they mix all the water in the bathroom, so if you want hot water, you can get hot water in the bathroom. But there really are no places that you can do that. And the other pet peeve, I'm an economist, so I always think about these things, is you have to buy have you noticed you have to buy a really giant bottle of water once you get into the airport? Well, you guys have that. I take it back. You have that really nice little airport. That is so fun. But if you go through the Atlanta airport, there are like 5 concourses, and you can't get anything less than a 20-ounce bottle of water. Well, who wants to lug that around? So, but you can buy nice small Cokes. Anyway, so getting water in airports, I think, will be my personal campaign after they fire me from CDC. Actually, the airport in Jackson Hole, which is in a national park, it had hydration stations. Yeah, which I thought were really cool. So and they were designed to fill water bottles. They weren't drinking fountains, so you could go in. I think we need those everywhere. I think you guys should start a campaign to get one in your airport. All right. So, public and clinical education efforts. I mean, everywhere, public health and in the clinical setting, we need to be encouraging people to drink water. Drink water. Which, of course, assumes that you have safe water to drink. So we'll say a little bit about that in a second. So settings, we've talked a lot about the settings for the prevention and control of obesity. It happens almost everywhere you can think of. I mean, there is not one place that I can think of where you spend part of your life where there's not some way that we can't help improve the food you eat or the way that you move and physically interact with that environment so that you're living a healthier life. Everywhere from your living room to your church, to your work site, to your community center, to your school. So one of the things, and one of the ways that we've done this, I think, has been working with the White House. I mean, I think it was, this is something that we've been pushing at CDC for a long time, but you can't imagine what a boost it is for us at the federal level to have a First Lady who comes in and really wants to make this an important issue during her tenure. And so CDC's been very active with the whole entire Let's Move campaign. I've been particularly active on the towns and cities, Let's Move Towns and Cities. There's all these different elements of that. But one of the really important ones is getting kids off to a healthy start is Let's Move Childcare. Because there are more than 12 million children who spend a good part of their day every week in childcare centers. And this is a really important place to start impacting their health early and building some lifelong physical activity habits. One of the most important things, again, is to provide access to water during meals and throughout the day, and to avoid serving sugar-sweetened beverages to children in those settings, and to even think about limiting fruit juices, because fruit juices are okay in moderation, but fruit juices as a substitute for sugar-sweetened beverages, I mean, while they do have perhaps some nutritional advantages, still are the caloric content is an issue if that's your major form of drink. So also making sure that kids have access to non-fat milk is very important. And making sure that kids have access to fresh fruits and vegetables at every meal and served family style if possible, and not serving fried foods in daycare centers. And y'all, I don't know, probably think, fried foods in daycare centers? Well, come to Georgia, honey. So I could tell you stories there. I mean, who would eat okra if it wasn't fried? I didn't have okra in California, so I got to Georgia, I was like, what is this slimy stuff? Well, I found out if you fry it, it actually tastes pretty good. So how many people here like okra? I want to know how many people I've now offended. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sure that what? Okay, let's see how many, okay. I mean, there's a reason all that fried food is out there. It tastes good, right? I mean, there's something about frying food that makes it taste good, and that's a real challenge for us because we got too much of it now. So there are all different ways that we can moderate these habits, right? I mean, the worst thing we can do is to eat chicken fried steak, fried in trans fats every day, and have it for breakfast with a couple eggs on top and a little gravy and biscuits. Welcome to my world. They used to serve that in the CDC cafeteria when I first got there. So, no, I'm not kidding. I mean, when I first got to, the world has changed. And in the CDC cafeteria, which the CDC doesn't run, and I'm going to talk about institutional food service guidelines in a second, we had a contractor out there. And so who are the contractors? Well, they're generally small business people from the area, and they cooked, when I first came to CDC in the mid-1980s, they cooked what people cooked in that community. You could not get a vegetable that wasn't cooked for at least several hours. And I don't know how many of you have ever had the kind of collards that you have to keep out in the fields throughout the season so that you do have some sort of green vegetable in the wintertime, but you have to, they call it the recipe is the 7 waters. You have to cook them 7 times. And the only thing that makes them taste good by that time is to add some, fat back to them. So everything in our cafeteria, when I first got there, actually did have pork in it, and it was cooked in pork fat. And then for a while, you could have it with pork or without pork. I mean, I only say this because it's been a journey. It's been a journey for those of us at CDC. We're the only federal institution that's based outside Washington, D.C., and we were plopped down in the middle of the South. Well, I showed you that map, and you can see exactly what's happening with obesity in the South. And it's a combination of food habits, but the food habits that people have in the South derive from poverty and very limited access to food. So this is not because people in the South there are reasons that those food habits have evolved there. And those habits, even as we move into affluence, the food habits from our years in poverty don't change overnight. It's really, and that's our responsibility, is to help people move beyond that. It's a church, I get to preach, right? Hey. All right, so I'm trying to give you some facts along with the fiction and commentary. So, best practices. Again, in child care centers, drinking water is available inside and outside where it is visible for self-service. This may say child care centers, but this should be everywhere, in every community institution, in every school, in every workplace. What, you're looking for, where's the water on the tables? We're trying to encourage your physical activity, so I can tell you that there is water outside there because I have it on my table, because I looked for it on the table, it wasn't there, so I went out and got it. But drinking fountains, not just in airports, but lots of other places. And even when they built the brand new CDC building, which is LEED certified, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this in a second too, they hid the drinking fountains in the very back. I didn't know where they were forever, and finally found them. So, but there you go. That was 5 years ago, and times have changed. So these are some of the best practices that we've run over. And does SLO already have standards, guidelines for food served in child care centers? I'm just wondering, is that something you all have taken on already? For Head Starts. Great. And having Head Starts are really good is really important, because one of the things that we've learned is that when you start serving healthy foods to kids at that age, that's the age when the parents still seem very engaged. And you can turn parents into activists for healthy foods when you start getting to them when their kids are preschoolers. I think by the time their kids get to elementary school and high school, they're like, when they're leaving home, 18, could not come soon enough. But you get those parents at preschoolers, and you've got activists for life on the healthy food stuff. So just a little bit, to emphasize that drinks are really where we are targeting a lot of our efforts right now. And there's our champion. Another big thing that CDC's been doing and really trying out is let's move salad bars to schools. Do you have salad bars in your schools here now? Yeah, so I don't really need to say too much more about this, but, convincing schools that we should get salad bars in, it hasn't been an easy sell. And you might think it's a no-brainer here, but other places, it hasn't. It has been much harder to sell. And then and this is kind of the interesting thing about CDC, little insider stuff here. We have the Chronic Disease Center and Injuries and Environmental Health. Dick Jackson, who's going to be here later, used to be head of our environmental health centers. I worked with him there. And then we have our whole infectious disease side. Well, we're like any large institution. We oftentimes don't talk about across center lines too much about what we're doing in our programs. And so all of a sudden one day, our food safety people found out that our chronic disease people were moving salad bars in schools, and they just about went through the roof. There's salad bars in schools. Oh my gosh, those kids are going to cross-contaminate everything. So that was kind of one of those really interesting things. But I don't know if any of you have run across the challenge of having a school garden and trying to serve foods from school garden in your lunchrooms, and all of a sudden huge food safety issues cropped up. And those are, when we start moving out on these, I say that, I know I say that jokingly, but it has become a huge issue for us, really pushing the line, pushing out fresh fruits and vegetables and local grown, and addressing food safety issues and the challenges of new food safety at the same time. This is like looking for health in your county plans. This is something that you have to look at. How does this crosswalk, and how do you make sure that as you're pushing one initiative, you're addressing barriers that have come from other initiatives, such as to improve the safety of our supply. So, and I'm happy to talk about that more later, but not in this talk. So we've been doing salad bars, pushing salad bars to schools, and we have been working with a number of funders who have been willing to put up the funding for salad bars. Our goal was to get 6,000 salad bars in schools in 3 years. We've got I think that this should be 1,400 salad bars donated, but we haven't reached our goal yet. There are a lot more schools really who want salad bars than we're able to provide funding for. The capital costs of getting a salad bar going are high and do limit that. And we have had some cultural issues. The place we've had the most resistance to is we find the southern states don't want salad bars for their schools. Well, it's kind of interesting because generally throughout the South, going to a restaurant and seeing a salad bar available is not something you see. It's not within their sort of normal cultural points of reference, having salad bars in their communities. So we're in communities where salad bars are in restaurants and we're very used to that, moving them into schools isn't a big problem. But in trying to start out with salad bars in schools and then perhaps moving them to restaurants is a little bit of a different challenge. But on this whole, we've had a huge number of supporters, and a number of these supporters are from the agricultural, producers throughout California, and even national organizations who have members that farm within this county and the surrounding counties. So this has been one of our major initiatives. And I don't think I need to tell you all why salad bars, how it increases the fruit and vegetable choices that kids have readily available, but it is one of the easiest ways of meeting the new school meal regulations. And as it appears, it's also a way of meeting this, it's an affordable way of meeting the new school regulations, because a lot of criticism of the new USDA school lunch rules have come out of, well, it's too expensive to serve healthy foods. We're getting more and more evidence from around the country that many, many school districts are not only able to comply and are eager to comply, but have been able to do it actually and reduced their per meal costs at the same time. So, and it's very compatible with the half the plate message. In other words, keep half your plate, fruits and vegetables. So there are a few places where we've got fairly good evaluation data on salad bars. I'm not going to say too much about it. The Riverside School District, I don't know if you've seen what they're doing there, but one of the ways, this is one thing I like about Riverside. They're really very creative in what they're thinking about, as you all are creative here. But one of the challenges when you have new food items that are healthier is getting kids to try it, right? So, or getting kids to eat in the first place. So they're introducing now in some of their high schools their new food items through food trucks. So what a great, because it's so cool to eat out of a food truck, I guess. It's not for me, but, we used to call them the roach coach. What can I say? But, food trucks are in, and so they have a food truck that comes in and sells many of the new products that they're trying out and are hoping to get institutionalized into their schools. So I thought, it's the creative things that communities are doing around the country on this is really interesting. So another area where I've been working quite a bit, spending a lot of my time, is the beverage and food guidelines. And we created the health and sustainability guidelines for federal concession and vending operations. We have a rule in the feds that if you're going to create a title for something, it has to have at least 12 words, 4 of which are not understandable to the general public. So we violated that a little bit on this one, and we kept trying to condense it, but we call these food service guidelines to each other. But we came up with guidelines at CDC to apply to all of the Health and Human Services cafeterias and to vending that would give people healthier food choices and at their workplaces. And the most notorious place for bad food, not only bad in terms of unhealthy, but bad because it just didn't taste good, was the Humphrey Building Cafeteria, which is the headquarters of HHS in Washington. And that was the first place that we tried out. It's been an overwhelming success when we implemented our guidelines under a new contractor. The overall use of the cafeteria has gone way up. We serve both healthy and, we serve what people want, but we've increased the number of healthy options. We did have to promise everybody after we did an employee survey that they would still have access to the fried chicken once a week. So, we did. I'm not just joking about that. People, this is a transition to a healthier life, and fried chicken once a week in the cafeteria may not be what kills you at the end of the day. But it's, it's something that we learned as we were doing this, and that has been an overwhelming success. And now the General Services Administration, GSA, those people that had those really expensive conferences and got in all that trouble, well, there's a whole part of that agency that's really very forward-thinking. They didn't go to that conference in Las Vegas. All those people that I work with, no. They were back with me creating healthy food service guidelines. So GSA is implementing these now in all their lease spaces. So we've got about a quarter of lease buildings, and those are do you guys have a federal building here? You don't have a federal building in this county? I don't know where your nearest federal building is. But that's the kind of place, there's a cafeteria in there, and that's the kind of place they'd be putting these in, as well as the majority of the big buildings in Washington, the big government buildings. And so in 4 years, we should have all of the buildings serving healthy foods. And then the Department of Defense came to us, or we reached out to them and started working with them a little bit, and then the Assistant Secretary for Health of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health, a physician, came to us, and there is a Healthy Basis initiative and a Fit for Duty initiative that is now implementing our healthy food service guidelines throughout the military. Now, talk about bureaucracies. I'm not going to say anything about our ability to fight war when it's run by a bureaucracy, but because they've been doing an all right job. But that was a real challenge. Their food procurement at bases for both their military and civilian population. We're not serving 5 a day, I think, to our fighting members in Afghanistan just yet, buying local produce, but I don't know. That would, but we are really trying to get these in at all the bases, because obesity within the military, not just entrants who are applying for the military, is now becoming a huge problem. So there major activities are going on there. We also, the other thing we tried to do, and this is kind of in those lessons learned, is we also wanted our vending machines, of which I am a guilty partaker in vending machines on my floor, sometimes at 4 o'clock. I know I still have to finish something before I go home. There I am with my Cheetos. So I admit it. Full disclosure here. So, but we tried to get our vending machines we developed vending service guidelines, and probably a lot of you, what we ran into trouble with there was the Randolph-Shepard Act. So here you have vending machines, a whole vending machine industry in government that has really two purposes. One is to provide food and snacks and other things to employees, but the other is to provide an opportunity for employment for blind and disabled vendors. And when we pushed our vending machine guidelines out there, we really didn't think about we didn't engage them in talking about what the impact would be on them, how to make this easy for them, other things. And we got slapped down. We made some huge mistakes there, and one of the mistakes we made is that when we looked at tackling this area, we didn't look at who were the stakeholders in this, who were the affected participants. We didn't go to them and say, we're thinking about doing this, what do you think? Where do you see the barriers might be? We didn't do that, and we paid a very heavy price. We have not really been able to implement our vending guidelines very well because of some of the early setbacks we have. We have a very dedicated person who works in our Division of Nutrition and Physical Activity who basically said, I'm taking that as a challenge. I'm going to get the blind vendors convinced that this is going to be better for their business to do this, and I'm going to find an industry way to make it easy for the blind vendors to know when a product they might put in their vending machine meets the guidelines or not. And he's actually engaged through our small business innovation money to build an app so that you can instantly tell with a product whether it meets the guidelines or not, to make it very easy for vendors. So I'm glad that he has persevered, but we probably should have engaged with them and done that in the first place. We also found that putting guidelines like this in place, in many ways, we learned a lot of lessons from the tobacco control. How many people in here worked on tobacco control activities? Because, they were really, I know they're, okay, one over there. And one of the things that we learned from this is we learned that it's best to start local first. Let's try these things out at the local level. So if you're going to put guidelines in place, it's best to try these out at the county level before you try to pass a state law. And already we're seeing in one state that they probably should have talked to the tobacco control folks, try these things out. They went straight to the state to do this. And just like in tobacco, there are people who are not, really don't want to limit what are in think about what's in those vending machines, particularly the drink ones. There are people who don't want limits on what are in those, and they're coming out swinging on this. So I would encourage all of you, if you're going to take on these very hard-pushing initiatives, to talk to your colleagues who have been through the tobacco wars and revisit the lessons learned and not repeat them. Okay, and here's another exciting things that we're doing. This is my drinking. I didn't ever really envision that I'd be on a drinking fountain campaign, but evidently, life takes you in funny directions. So one of the things that we're also doing at CDC with some very entrepreneurial folks from GSA administration, again, these were from the Chicago region, not the Western region, who went to Las Vegas, but they stayed home in Chicago. It gets very cold there, and they come up with really great ideas when they can't get out because there's so much snow. So they came up with the Fitwell program. This is the Facility Innovations Towards Wellness Environment leadership, and this is kind of like the LEAD program. What are the elements of a building or a new building? Because think about it, GSA, General Service Administration, they lease tons of buildings all around the U.S. for federal purposes, so they have a great deal of market clout. So we are creating a rating system for a building, and right at the top of there, can you find the drinking fountain? So, no, see, just Hey, I mean, but it has things like, does this building have a tobacco smoke-free policy? Is there healthy food available to employees? Does it have a physical fitness room? Is the building located near walking and biking paths? Are the stairwells positioned in such a way that employees are encouraged to take stairwells rather than take the stairs rather than the elevators? And we have this whole criteria, and if you meet that, you need to meet to get rated as a Fitwell building. We're just getting ready to go into the beta testing of this, but I mean, it's similar to, we see it sort of like LEED certification. Do you get Fitwell certification? And our hope is that eventually having a Fitwell rated building, if you're looking to lease your you're a developer and you have a building and that you're leasing for corporate purposes, that this is going to give you an added edge. So it certainly will if you're competing for a GSA lease. We also view hospitals as work sites. And we have some very important hospital initiatives. We're working with a couple of different hospital organizations on getting healthy foods served in their workplaces. And I'm sure that all of you know that many hospital chains, given the financial pressures that they're facing, have actually leased out their food space within the hospital for visitors and employees to organizations like Burger King's and Wendy's and McDonald's. And so we are trying to either discourage many of that having those choices available, or at least encouraging those vendors to serve healthy choices to their employees. So there are about 5.3 million employees who work in hospital systems. And part of the reason that we're really pushing on all of these institutions is because the power of institutional purchasing in a community can actually drive a local food system. It can influence through peer efforts the behavior of participants across the community, and as an institutional purchaser, food products that weren't available before now tend to flow into those communities. And become available outside of those. So institutional food purchasing is really a very, very important strategy to jumpstart a local food system. We have in Minnesota now, there is a new hospital initiative. We had a meeting almost a year ago, about 9 months ago, very similar to the meeting we're having right now, where we brought the public health, the health community together with many parts of the ag community and food services community. And then just a month ago, they announced that 25% of the food from hospitals would be from locally sourced. So as a way to really push their regional food system development. So there's a whole, we have a whole practice to practice series on what can be done in hospital settings, which I do want to leave a couple of minutes for questions. But there are a number of places here that I've given these, and I'm happy to leave my slides behind so that if anybody wants to get access to them later, you're able to. Food policy councils, we've seen a rise in food policy councils. CDC funded a number of food policy councils with our stimulus funding a few years ago. A lot of these were at the state level, and now what we're seeing is an overall emergence of, we have food policy council here, and or people working at this level. So we're seeing an emergence of local food policy councils, and I even sit on the local food policy council in Savannah, Georgia, and we're doing really exciting things. This is a way to integrate many of these community activities, and it's a particularly good way to address access to healthy food for underserved areas. So there are many things, and I like, that Food Policy Councils, one of the great things is they tackle the food system sort of from soup to nuts. They're not only dealing with supply, but a lot of them are also dealing with sustainability issues, the recycling of wastes, and a variety of other things. So they're pretty exciting. This just gives you a little bit of an idea of the range of things that Food Policy Councils work on. Here are a number of projects that they're doing. And I only put that picture on there because that's my very favorite picture. So I go, where am I going to put that somewhere? So, we're trying to, that's sort of, a lot of food policy councils work on animal ordinances, trying to keep dangerous animals away from children, but, chickens in the backyard and whatever. It's a little bit of a cultural shift, so as you can see there, oh my gosh, I thought that was good. So those are the kinds of things they work on. The CDC's also funded a lot of programs on gardens and wellness, community gardens, school gardens, gardens in facilities for seniors, particularly institutionalized seniors, is a really important way of improving quality of life in those communities. And then we're trying to do a lot of what we're doing. So we're the feds, right? You guys are doing what you're doing at the local level. You're trying to incorporate health into your county plans, and you're doing that. So I think that under the Affordable Care Act, one of the provisions was the National Prevention Strategy. And that, I think that there was a feeling that we needed to put our money where our mouths were, and we need to be thinking about health through all the parts of our government. So the National Prevention Strategy is a body of representatives from across all of the departments, like transportation, housing, ag, who come together and look at where they can jointly work on initiatives that improve health. So for example, HUD put up smoke-free policies in multifamily housing, having better physical activity in HUD-sponsored homes, things like that, Department of Transportation, complete streets, safe routes to schools. There are many, many different places. So and they have a strategy that is available on the website that really does a lot of the things that I'm talking about and encourages it across federal agencies and builds it into federal programs and federal grants programs. We work very closely with USDA so that many of the USDA grants that you are now applying for are food system and health. They're a combination between the two. So there is a big healthy eating piece of the National Prevention Strategy. So there is a resource, the CDC recommended community strategy and measurements to prevent obesity, that's available at this link below, which we'll make sure that you have available to you. And those are really all of the slides I have, but I do want to say a couple more things before I open it up to questions, and we'll just have a few minutes to take a few questions. So one of the things I wanted to say is that one of the things I didn't talk about today is other efforts across the government, such as the new Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, that are really trying to address this problem of, okay, we already have 20 to 30% of our communities are obese, and these are people who are pre-diabetic, diabetic, have hypertension, are at risk for heart disease and stroke and certain cancers. So what are we going to do with our health systems to better address these problems so that we don't break the bank? And that's something that we all need to think about. And Jennifer, I was thrilled to hear you're from the Y, because one of our big initiatives at CDC is the Diabetes Prevention Program. And our big partner in that have been the Ys. And that's where we're actually moving out with our clinic, working on the Ys have been implementing a very, very successful and cost savings program targeted at people with prediabetes, and they're getting reimbursed for those programs through people's health plans. So there are many, and that we really need, we can't just work on the prevention side. Here I am, a public health person saying that, but we're really gonna have to get better at hypertension management, making sure people are managing their cholesterol and doing all of that secondary and tertiary prevention around diabetes care. Because our responsibility isn't only to the people who are healthy and keeping them to stay healthy, but for the people who didn't have the opportunity to hear these messages 10, 15, 20 years ago when they started down this path. We have got to make sure that their lives are as healthy as possible. And the other thing I wanted to say is that what I've noticed across the country too is that working on food system projects is really a great equalizer. You get people from all different walks of life, people who have very different political viewpoints, et cetera, together. But when you come together to work on food projects, people all, for want to participate. And I really see that these food system projects that we're working on, not only do they address problems in underserved areas, improving the overall health of community, but I see this as an emerging nursery for new leaders. Hopefully new elected leaders are going to be coming out of much of this food system work, out of food policy councils, and out of another initiative. And hopefully we're going to be breeding, getting into my ag talk here, a new crop of leaders who come from experience of solving problems together rather than dissension and strife in their political arenas. So in some ways, perhaps that will be, when we look back on this 20 to 30 years from now, that may be one of the greatest things that we yield from our food system work. So we're not measuring it just in terms of health, but there are many, many other dimensions to that work. And that last comment was strictly mine, as you can tell. But I want us all to think about that as we're doing this work, and also how we're providing leadership training to these newly emerging leaders. I think it's our responsibility, at least those of you in my generation, to nurture these new leaders along and get them out there in the world. So I'd like to thank you for putting up with me for too long.
I do have a first question to get us started. So has CDC abandoned tracking of overweight as opposed and is only tracking obesity at this point? If yes, what was behind the decision and what are the implications? And probably more importantly, have we given up on trying to get people to a normal BMI as opposed to just not being obese?
No, we haven't. I did not put up the numbers for overweight. I think that when it comes to communicating the magnitude of the problem, the obesity numbers are compelling, but we also track the overweight numbers. So we haven't given up on that. And so are you talking about, are we taking on efforts to get people who are overweight or obese to reverse that in themselves? Is
right.
that, yeah. I would have to say that we're hopeful that the efforts that we are pursuing throughout the community not only get people to change habits who are currently of a good weight, to change their habits now so they don't progress onto a poor weight, but also a number of our initiatives are designed so that people who would like to move back towards a healthier BMI are able to do so. I'd probably say our single most important initiative along that may be on our sugar-sweetened beverage initiative, because that is the one area that if we really could change behavior on there, we could get people to move backwards.
Okay, the next question actually is very topical since we've just finished a hunger-free communities plan, and it's what's the relationship between the hungry population and obesity?
The relationship between a hungry population and obesity. That's a really interesting question, and that's a question that's caused a lot of debate and dissension among the advocates of hunger programs. As lots of you probably know, you can be obese and be hungry because you have food insecurity and instability in the availability of your food. And having food insecurity a certain portion of the month can actually trigger behaviors that aggravate your obesity. But I think the real challenge for us has been around, and this is where we get slapped and we're not allowed to talk so much about policy, but I think that let me put it this way. There, among the nutrition advocates and the hunger advocates, one of the challenges in trying to come together on joint policy really has been around SNAP. And is SNAP a program to address hunger? Is SNAP a poverty program, or is SNAP a nutrition program? And
SNAP here we call CalFresh.
CalFresh. Okay, CalFresh. SNAP by any other name? But still, regardless. And so there have been, on the nutrition side, at least among national advocates, a number of proposals that have been put forward to change the SNAP requirements, which will ultimately change the CalFresh requirements, such as issues around, for example, that you shouldn't be able to buy sugar-sweetened beverages with SNAP, or that retailers should be required to carry there should be different requirements for retailers so that they can take SNAP, or that there should be even things like candy and other types of food you should not be able to purchase with your CalFresh, with your EBT card. And that has created an enormous amount of tension in between the hunger community and the nutrition community. And that tension is derived from a number of sources, because I'm going to just put it out there, but people in the hunger community oftentimes feel very caught between wanting to pursue what they feel are healthy goals and also trying to satisfy the needs of their funders. And I'm just going to leave it at that. And we work, and we're actually going to have a small meeting in January to try and bring this group of people together and talk about things that both sides are saying, okay, we're ready to talk now, that 2 years ago, we really weren't able to talk about it. It's very tense. And the reason this is such a high profile now is that SNAP, which you get, CalFresh, is up for reauthorization in the Farm Bill. And that Farm Bill is stuck, and people are concerned that if the Farm Bill isn't extended in this Congress, that it is wide open again in the next Congress. So.
And also topical with the upcoming election is something specific to California. And there were actually 2 questions about whether CDC has a policy on genetically modified food or organisms for food, since there's a ballot proposition, as you probably know, that would require labeling of foods that have GMOs in it.
So let me say that right now, CDC does not have a policy on genetically modified foods, because you can talk to me later about that, but we do not have no, and let me say, but here's where CDC is. Okay, so number one, first and foremost, we are a science agency. So what we do have a policy on is that we have a policy that we study potential threats to human health. We're not as heavily engaged in looking at genetically modified foods just yet. Believe me, it's on our radar screen. Most of that research is being done through USDA, but it definitely, if we had funding for it, and we do research on what Congress gives us funding for, we would be looking at, we would be doing the epidemiology behind the use of genetically modified food and potential health effects. So, and let me also say that in many ways, I may have my political beliefs. They're not really political. I think they're health and health policy beliefs. I don't think they're political at all in terms of what I've indicated in this room. But the strength of CDC is that we're a science agency. And if we stray into politics too much, then it undercuts our science. And that first and foremost, to those of you who are out there really wanting to push initiatives, you need to be able to depend on us to give you the best science that we can so that you have the best ammunition to go forward. And we're very careful to protect that.
And we have a fairly politically active audience, so we're going to move from GMOs to climate change. And the question is, what peril does climate change pose to the food and water supply?
Well, that's a really interesting one, and we just had, I don't know if anybody attended this, but one of the projects that I've been funding is the formation of the Healthy Farms, Healthy People Coalition, and yesterday I was traveling, day before yesterday, they did a webinar on the conservation programs in the Farm Bill and health, and many of those conservation programs are also help try to mitigate the effects of climate change in agricultural areas. So I think that we are not doing a ton of research on this, but we are really trying and have mapped out ever since Dr. Julie Gerberding was our director. We have been a strong advocate in the need to recognize that climate change does affect health. It affects health everywhere from shifting where foods are going, are being grown, to the problems of having more extremes in climate and the impact on the food supply. I think the one that CDC, we have actually activated our Emergency Operations Center and sort of call this a slow-moving public health emergency, is the drought in the Midwest, which many climate change people would attribute to that drought, to shifts in the climate. And so we are looking at issues related to food supply, not only food supply here in the U.S., but the impact of a shortened food supply on, particularly in lesser developed countries, and the impacts there. We look at impacts of, there are a whole bunch of infectious disease issues related to climate change and the movement of vectors. So we try to stay on it, but we're not out in front in terms of making policy on that, but we're trying to look at the science behind it. And actually, Dick, when he's here later, you can ask that question of him because he dealt with that. And the one place in CDC that does our climate change work is the center that he formerly led.
I think we have time for one more question. It's a fairly easy question, but has large implications. And it has to do with the BMI. And the question is, there's been talk of changing the current BMI guidelines, perhaps moving what's now considered overweight at a BMI of 25 up to 27. And is that true, and what are the implications?
Well, I probably could talk to you about the cost of that, but that gets into an area, but that gets, I'll admit that gets a little bit beyond my area of expertise, the rationale behind that. So I'm happy to take that one back and get an answer on it, but that's not where my expertise lies. I hate to finish this on the one question I can't answer. Anybody want to ask me an easy one?
Okay, well, thank you very much.